Hey guys. This is part 4 of What If Naruto Was Adopted by the Anbu. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 7, Connections. 7 years old? It was his birthday. Once a year we gather to celebrate the very great achievement that you were able to make yet another trip around the sun. That was the thought that kept coming back to his mind, again and again and again. It was his birthday. He was 9 whole years old. Why is it that the biggest celebrations are always for those who have completed the fewest orbits? This time last year, he had celebrated with a party. All his cousins, only a small percentage of whom were actually the children of his parents' siblings, incidentally, had come, and Sasuke had felt so old, so grown up. Surely it would be more logical to throw a bigger party for a 30-year-old than an 8-year-old? And yet this year, Mother's birthday went by all but unnoticed, while your party even included contraband fireworks. He quietly slipped under the tape still blocking the path to his home and crept through the silent streets. It had only been a few months since that horrible day. That day Itachi had mown through his family, their family, like a scythe through hay, and made silent this large, busy compound. 8 years old, isn't it a pity that Madara's vision for immortality proved futile? The time you have is set, Sasuke, but it hasn't ended just yet. Sasuke hesitated beside the gate that marked the end of the pathway that would lead to the front door of the house he had lived in. He could go in, climb into his old bed, and for a night pretend that the massacre had never happened. Pretend that he would wake tomorrow and run downstairs to find his mother making breakfast, humming all the while, and his father settled at the low table with his newspaper spread out on his knees, and Itachi. Happy birthday. You didn't accomplish much, Otoro, but you didn't die this year either. I suppose that's good enough. With a whimper, Sasuke's resolve broke and he fled, running from the place that had been his home, tears blinding him as he ran. Just ran and ran as if he could outrun the way his world had been torn apart. When he finally slowed, chest heaving and sides aching furiously, he looked around and felt his throat close up to realize that he had made his way right into the Uchiha plot in Konoha's cemetery. After a moment's hesitation, he began to wander through the rows and rows of almost fresh graves. It had been 5 months since they'd been buried, and the naked mounds of earth were flattening, grass creeping in to set up shop and mask the place the caskets had been lowered into the earth. It took a while, but finally, Sasuke was standing before the twin headstones of his parents. He stood for a while with his hand on his father's carved name before he realized that he was standing directly over the man, and moved hastily off the grave. Then he turned to his mother's headstone, and traced the letters of her names. With a sob, he sank down in the tiny space between the two markers, curling up into a ball and hiding his head in his arms. He spent his 9th birthday weeping. Much later, when the sun had long since set and it was time for evening shift to change to night shift, a certain Anbu appeared to relieve the one watching over the Uchiha survivor. Owl sighed, looking at the boy, who was sprawled belly down on the divide of solid grass between the spotty grass dirt of his parents' graves. He been here long? He asked Rat. Rat nodded tiredly. Since before noon, he replied. Owl nodded. Go to bed, Rat, you sound exhausted. Oh, I am, man. I'll be glad when we rebuild the police force. Right now I'm so run off my feet I don't remember what my bunk looks like. You take care of yourself, old man. Owl made a noise of protest at the address and mock growled, pretending to chase the younger Anbu away. His smile faded the moment he was alone, and he approached the small form of Uchiha Sasuke, idly noting the similarities to the night his clan had died. The kid had been sprawled lifelessly on his belly then, too. Okay, kiddo, he sighed, kneeling and gently rolling the boy over, into his arms. It's against protocol, but you'll get sick if I let you sleep out here. I'll take you home. The boy's face was streaked with dirt and tears, the evidence of a full day's mourning written out for Owl to read. From the feel of him, the boy was thin and underweight, probably not eating right. Not that I blame him, the Anbu thought dryly, trying not to flash back to that horrible night. This will take time to heal, if it does at all. Poor brat. Filled with pity, Al carried the new 9-year-old back to the small apartment Sarutobi had assigned him, taking in its neatly arranged furnishings speculatively. At least the boy was tidy. Al couldn't stand tripping over objects every step. "Here we go," he whispered, easing the boy out of sandals and jacket and placing him into his bed, testing the blankets to be sure they were warm enough. After a moment of hesitation, he found a washcloth and wet it with warm water before carefully cleaning off the boy's face. Thankfully, like most children, Sasuke was dead to the world in his exhausted unconsciousness, and he didn't so much as stir when Al wiped at his features. When he was done, he smoothed back the boy's haphazard hair and was pleased when the troubled expression on Sasuke's face eased a little. "Per kid," he said out loud this time. "Take care of yourself, Sasuke." Al retreated to the windowsill until just after dawn, when Panther appeared to relieve him. He never mentioned the little episode again. The Hitaki family home was quiet. Peaceful, even. The evening summer sun shone placidly down, the large oak in the backyard tossing shade in pretty patterns. Naruto was working steadily on his homework at the dining room table, while his father set about creating an evening meal for the pair of them to share. Predictably, such pleasant normalcy couldn't last in any house that contained anyone with Hitaki or Uzumaki genes. This time, disorder arrived in the form of a white-clad Anbu man. "Dog-sen," the man said, appearing outside the kitchen window set over the sink that Kakashi was using to scrub a handful of carrots in. Kakashi paused for a split second before turning to measure rice into the rice cooker. "Retired Ox-san. It's Hitaki-san to you." "You've been recalled to active duty," Ox said flatly. Kakashi didn't sound terribly concerned. "Is that so? And what have I been recalled to do, exactly?" "That's classified," Ox said stonily. Kakashi actually laughed at that, the old sort of dry laugh that he used to have when he found something so morbid or ridiculous or traumatic that he had to make a noise, had to find some sick sense of humor in it or go insane. Back before he'd been gifted Naruto and discovered the true, joyful humor of something innocent. "Let me explain something to you, Ox-san," he said casually, beginning to slice an eggplant thinly. If he made the pieces slender enough and mixed them into something else, sometimes Naruto ate them by mistake. "You are going to tell me everything you know about this mission. Then I will decide if I will accept it. Then I will decide if it is worth dusting off my dog mask for. I am not taking a single step with you until all of this happens." Ox looked unhappy. "I can't do that, sir," he said. Kakashi shrugged, tossing the eggplant into the stew boiling on the range and turning down the temperature of the stove so that it didn't burn. He dumped a load of frozen peas in as well and turned to the rice cooker to stop it from boiling over. "Naruto," he called at the doorway. "Have you finished your homework yet?" "Nearly, Dad," came the reply from the next room. "One more question?" "Well, finish it and then set the table, okay? Dinner's nearly ready. And wash your hands." "Okay." Kakashi turned back to the Anbu. "Are you alright, Ox-san?" he asked, full concernedly. "You have been recalled to active duty, Anbu Captain Dog," Ox repeated forcefully. Kakashi sighed patiently. "Ox-san," he said clearly, "either you tell me what is going on, or I won't go. I'm not an idiot, and I'm about as stubborn as they come. If you refuse to tell me, you will have to take me by force. Are you up to that challenge?" Ox hesitated. Standing barefoot in a kitchen bannered with a child's artwork, watching over a cooking dinner like a woman and without a weapon in sight, there was still something dangerous about this man. The way he handled that plastic spatula was practically deadly. Suddenly, Ox remembered who exactly he was stonewalling, and how was it that he had forgotten in the first place, and stepped backwards a fraction. "The Hokage is meeting with a diplomatic party from Suna," he blurted before he made the conscious decision to do so. "He wants you to join the Anbu Guard, because Dog is well known and feared. He thinks that with you in attendance they will be more easily persuaded to behave." Kakashi sighed a little. His Anbu cover was well known, eh? Damn. That defeated the purpose of a codename altogether. Even if his identity was unknown, knowing his code and the actions he had performed underneath it made it easier to track him down, upping the chance of crosshairs being placed between his son's eyes. When he found the leak, that person would be in trouble. Back to the matter at hand. With the decimation of the police force, thanks, Itachi, Anbu was stretched thin to breaking trying to compensate for the loss and fulfill the duties of both forces. As a result, the Hokage was left scrounging for hands, which had in turn more or less resulted with Kakashi moonlighting as dog and pulling double shifts. He wasn't the only one. Other retirees had been recalled, some full-time, and some jounin were even being given A and B-ranked missions, which meant that the Hokage was really scraping the bottom of the barrel. Of course, being dog, Kakashi never got assigned patrols or gate duty. Oh no. It was always rescue the princess or assassinate the daimyo or intimidate the diplomats with the force of your glare but don't cause an international scandal. Pray you never become well known, kid, he said gruffly to Ox. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Watch the food while I find my uniform. Ox got halfway through a splutter of protest before Kakashi was back again and frowning at him. How long is this mission going to take? He asked. The diplomatic party is arriving tonight. You are to guard them overnight, and they will meet with the Hokage in the morning. Kakashi's frown deepened. That meant 1, maybe 2 nights that Naruto would be left alone, depending on how long the meeting went for. Far too long for a 7-year-old. That being said, the last time he'd left Pakken to babysit, Kakashi had come home to find that the pug had been letting Naruto train himself into an exhausted stupor, and hadn't fed him more than once a day. The Hitaki hadn't needed some slap upside the head to know that he had screwed up a choice of babysitter. But who else could watch him? Kiba and Hana were down with the flu, and while Naruto never seemed to get sick, Sim was run off her feet looking after them. Kakashi couldn't ask her to take on Naruto as well. Jiraiya was out of town, Genma was probably drunk by now, Kurenai was working early tomorrow morning, Anko was just a plain bad idea, Rado was away on a mission to aim, Asuma and Yugugo were who knew where, and Hade had come down with another flu after a 2-second interaction with Sim's kids. Dog-san? Is anything wrong? Ox asked carefully. Kakashi scowled at him. I have made no plans for the care of my son, he said flatly. Ox looked relieved. Arrangements have been made. Hitaki Naruto will be watched by an officer inside ANBU headquarters. Yeah, Kakashi drawled. That is so not happening. The last time I let one of you babysit, and that was an emergency, I found myself sitting next to Naruto on a couch facing off against Irika-sensei and a child psychologist, both of whom wanted to know why my son had started sticking people with pens and compasses whilst playing ninja. Ox's mouth twitched behind his mask. Then what will you do with him? He asked. Kakashi sighed. I cross a line I promised myself I would never cross, he replied seriously. Ox felt a chill flush down his spine that was in no way misplaced. Naruto was staring at him accusingly. It was amazing how those wide blue eyes could burn a hole in one's back. Kakashi, decked out in his white Anbu armor, was darning a hole in his cloak. Ox had vanished with the promise to cover for him until Naruto's babysitter could arrive, leaving Kakashi to track down said babysitter and procure his cooperation, and then break the news to Naruto. Needless to say, Naruto had not been impressed. Kakashi risked a glance in the boy's direction and cringed inwardly. Now the boy was looking so betrayed one would think that Kakashi had drowned his puppy in carbonic acid or something. I should be back tomorrow night, he said. Naruto continued to stare at him, adding in a little lip wobble like a pro. Kakashi finished his last stitch and snipped the thread off with a little pair of scissors. Be good, he cautioned, swinging the white cloak over his shoulders and fastening it around his throat. Naruto continued to stare at him. Kakashi approached and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Seriously, he said, be good. It's the only way to survive this. Good luck. Right on cue, the doorbell rang, immediately followed by a rapid knocking on the door. Naruto abandoned his award-winning hurt, abandoned and unloved expression for a very real look of horror, and took off at a run. Kakashi steeled himself, picked up his newly polished dog mask, and walked down the stairs to the front door. Good evening, Guy, he said to the man outside, standing aside so the green beast could enter. Thanks for coming at such short notice. It is nothing, my rival, Guy announced, coming inside and pausing to remove his sandals, A remarkably human gesture from the remarkably odd man. I am glad that I could aid you in your wonderful yet challenging endeavor that is parenthood. I am overjoyed that you have at last accepted my offer of aid. Food's in the fridge, Kakashi narrated, kneeling to pull on his own sandals. Help yourself to whatever you want. Naruto's had his dinner tonight and finished his homework. He just needs a bath. Bedtime's at 7:30, lights out at 8. He should be up by 5:15. Normally I run him through some exercises early in the morning, and you're welcome to do the same, but Guy, you really can't push him too hard. He needs to be awake for school. Guy pulled a good guy pose, number 18, if Kakashi wasn't mistaken. Never fear, my rival. I will be certain that your beloved child merely endures a rigorous session of youthful movement, but nothing too bad. He will be more than energized for the day. Right. School starts at 9, he needs to be there by 10 to. Just drop him at the gate, he can find his own classroom. If my mission's not done, school ends at 3:30, and just get him some ramen or something on the way home for dinner. I've left money on the counter for anything he needs. I think that's everything. Shoes on, Kakashi stood up, rubbing his hand over the back of his head. I should be home by tomorrow, but if I'm not, I'd say if I'm not back by the night after next, something's gone wrong, but that's pretty unlikely on this mission. Guy nodded energetically, taking notes in his little notebook. I understand, my rival. I will be a most excellent stand-in carer for your most precious heir. He paused, looking around. Where is the youthful Naruto? Kakashi slipped a few things into his kunai pouch and reached behind him to raise his cloak's hood over his hair. I think you will find him hiding under the bed in the spare room. Have a good time. He flicked his fingers in a salute and left at a jog, placing his mask over his face as soon as he was out of sight. Hidden under the bed, Naruto whimpered when the door to the spare room swung open. My youthful friend, where are you? Naruto bit his lip, unwilling to respond, but Guy hunkered down and slid under the bed on his belly. Dad must have sold him out. Bastard. Greetings, son of my rival. It is a happy day. You and I will enjoy the flames of youth together while your esteemed father completes his mission of great importance. Hello, Froggy-san, the boy replied, admitting defeat. So, how do you want to enjoy the flames of youth? Guy attempted a pose or flail or something, then seemed to realize that he was wedged in the tiny space between the bed above him and the floor below. A moment of helpless wiggling, and he managed to squirm out into the open again. He said again, leaping to his feet and right into a pose. Let us play a game. Naruto reluctantly drew out from under the bed as well and sat up on his knees, looking cautiously up at the person thing that his father had enlisted to watch him overnight. Kakashi had sat Naruto down several months ago and explained to him in detail that Mato Guy was completely human, albeit a rather strange one. Naruto supposed he knew that, intellectually, but still couldn't quite shake the feeling that this green beast was something not normal. In any event, he was in no way ready to give up his Froggy-san form of address, if only because he felt it rather suited the man. Besides, Dad frequently made dogs watch him. Was a mutant frog really such a stretch? Okay, he said. What shall we play? Guy considered. Would you like to play Attack the Post? He asked. Naruto hesitated. Basically, that was training in the form of, you guessed it, attacking a post, or tree, or log. First one to pass out loses. I'm not supposed to be working myself up at this time of night, he said. True enough. Besides, the you must not lie rule didn't count around Froggy-san. It just didn't. Guy was in a thinking pose. Then we shall play an inside game of youth, he shouted. We shall play Shuji. Ria buried the board, Naruto reported, naming one of his father's troublemaker dogs. Guy deflated. What games have your faithful canine comrades left untouched? He asked reasonably. Naruto chewed his lip. We could play Go Fish? He suggested. Guy brightened. Yes. We will. And if I lose, I shall do 100 push-ups. No, you really don't have to, Naruto protested weakly, but the green-clad man had already run downstairs to find the deck of cards. The child reluctantly followed, thinking that it would be a long night. Some time later, Guy finished a set of push-ups and struck a victory pose. "You see, my young friend, I have fulfilled my promise." Naruto, who had been playing a game of solitaire with the deck of cards, abandoned the game and gathered the deck into a neat pile. "Oh, that's good. Do you want to play a game of Snap?" "Certainly. And if I lose, I shall walk on my hands for the rest of the evening." "You really don't have to do that," the young Hatake tried. "We could just play, we don't have to compete." "No! I have made a promise, and I shall honor that promise. Begin." "Is it bedtime yet?" "Snap! The flames of youth are victorious." Froggy-san, that's not a pair." The evening passed in this manner, and Naruto ran for his bedroom the moment the clock ticked over to 7:30. Guy followed him upstairs, walking lightly on his hands to tuck him in, the goodnight lasting well past the time that Dad had decreed was lights out. Eventually, Naruto took to feigning sleep just to make him leave. Being watched by Froggy-san was exhausting. Fog was thick and heavy in Kumokage. The mountain that the village was built on was well and truly hidden in the clouds that morning. The Raikage was watching out the window, the fog so solid that it hid the street a bare 3 stories below, though he could hear the noise of his village going about its daily business. Today, his mind was dwelling on his village's dwindling supply of able-bodied shinobi. Kumo was an increasingly old village, its current shinobi generation having fewer children than the one before, resulting in a disproportionate adult-to-child ratio. Before long, they would have a shinobi force of half or a third the size of their current one, as most ninjas simply grew too old, and no new ones stepped forwards to replace them. Keenly aware of this, the Raikage had sent his men out to the civilian villages throughout Kaminari no Kuni, searching for children to take back to Kumo to train as shinobi. He'd also put pressure on Kunoichi, making it hard for the unmarried and even harder for those without children, and had placed money rewards and promotions on the table for any shinobi who procreated. It was during the search for the next generation of Kumo ninja that the Hatake situation had been unearthed, and a frustrating challenge set to the Yandame Raikage. Hatake had somehow settled in a large town in the south of Lightning Country, probably remaining undetected by the size of the place. Frustratingly, the only people who seemed to know the mother who tied the youngest Hatake genius to Kumo seemed to be the girl's parents, a pair of innkeepers who muttered darkly about the man they blamed for the death of their daughter and scowled when questioned about their grandchild, but seemed incredibly reluctant to offer details. Of course, the logistics of how it happened were irrelevant now, 7 years down the line. All the Yandame cared about was getting the young Hatake back to the place his mother's blood dictated he should be. A first attempt had ended disastrously, and the Raikage had abandoned the venture. But recently, rumors were reaching his ears about the power of the young boy, making him revisit the option of attempting to procure the child. He was still young enough to influence, young enough to win his loyalty, and word had it that he was a prize well worth working for. Imagine a shinobi with the skills and blood of Hatake copycat Kakashi placing his might and genes behind Kumo. The image was a tantalizingly tempting one. Such a venture would take planning. If he had learned anything from the retrieval missions to Konoha in the past, seeking both the Hyuga and Hatake heirs, it was that, whatever her faults, Konoha guarded her children well. And one should never cross the angry father she contained. Another possible option was to chase after the Uchiha child. News of the near-total decimation of the famous clan had spread far and wide through all countries. There were no angry fathers guarding that boy's doorstep anymore. But the Raikage wasn't an idiot. He was aware that the Uchiha whelp was likely being guarded like the treasure he was. Not only that, but every other gold digger in the whole world was going to be making a play for Uchiha, and he had no guarantee the boy would prove pliant to a captor's will. The Yandame paused, turning away from his window to pour himself a cup of green tea from the pot set on the gilded wooden table nearby. Breathing in the steam rising off of it, he sank down into a comfortable chair and leant backwards. He would abandon the quest for the Hyuga Kekkai Genkai, but the Hatake, what better time to snatch him than when the entire world was watching the Uchiha? Surely the village would relax its constant vigilance around one genius when faced with the obvious vulnerability of the other? The Raikage smirked into his tea, taking a long sip of it, and savoring the slightly bitter flavor. Given time and planning, the opportunity to win the young Hatake would be sure to come along. Indeed, the only real challenge would be the boy's exceptionally talented father, who seemed paranoid enough to be on guard at all times. That can be circumnavigated, the village leader thought confidently. Sooner or later there will be a flaw, an error of judgment that we can exploit. Sooner or later, he would win his prize. A few hushed giggles were being muffled through the classroom, mostly kept in check by Mizuki-sensei's growling. Iruka-sensei seemed to be wavering between irritation and amusement, unsure of how to cope with the problem that was Naruto fast asleep at his desk. The 7-year-old had wandered into the classroom in a sort of daze, covered in grass clippings. Iruka had drawn him aside and asked him quietly if something was wrong, privately afraid that the boy had been mugged on the way to school, and had received a vague response about frogs. A crazy babysitter, and the babysitter's thoughts on what constituted a light workout. The blonde had also mentioned that he was sure his father hated him, but that was in a mumble that Iruka was reasonably certain he wasn't supposed to hear. Now, mid-morning, the little Hatake was showing his youth in the form of an impromptu nap being taken on his mathematics workbook, pencil still held loosely in his hand. Iruka was visibly debating whether to wake the child to continue his lesson, or let him have his much-needed sleep. Mizuki elbowed his way in between Sasuke and Kiba, who were on the verge of blows after a fiercely whispered debate on whether Naruto's unconscious state was disgraceful or cute, each 9-year-old glaring around the teacher's aide and generally looking like children that never used the words disgraceful or cute under any circumstances. Little Hyuga Hinata watched all of this from behind her wide, pale eyes. When the bell rang to signal lunch and Iruka-sensei released the class, Mizuki-sensei bodily moving Sasuke-kun and Kiba-kun and depositing them at different ends of the playground, Hinata didn't hurry in gathering her books into a neat pile on her desk. Collecting her bento box from her cubbyhole at the side of the room, she hesitated. "Iruka-sensei?" she said shyly to the man wiping off the blackboard. Iruka glanced at her. "HM? Yes, Hinata-kun?" he said. Hinata ducked her head. You see. I was just wondering, that is, if it's no trouble, could I perhaps stay inside today at lunch, just to keep in Naruto-chan, Naruto-kun." She looked panicked for a moment. "He doesn't like me calling him Sage-chan anymore," she said in a whisper, and Iruka had to fight not to smile. He, too, had been cornered by an irate Naruto and told that he was much too big to be called Naruto-chan like a little baby. "I understand, Hinata," the teacher said kindly. "I will not tell him of your slip of the tongue, they happen to everyone." The little girl looked hugely relieved. She stuttered, poking her 2 index fingers together in front of her in a nervous fidget. "What I meant to ask was, could I please stay inside, so that if Naruto-kun wakes you up, he won't be alone?" Iruka, who had envisioned a lunch break babysitting the sleeping blonde, barely stopped his body from sagging with relief. "That would be very helpful, Hinata-kun," he said. "Thank you." Then, glancing at the clock on the wall, "I tell you what, if he hasn't woken up within 10 minutes of the bell going, you come and get me and we'll move him somewhere he can sleep for a bit. This isn't like Naruto-kun, he must be exhausted. He can make up the work with me later when the rest of you are doing taijutsu practice." Hinata stuttered out her agreement, and Iruka fled to the staff room to collapse with all the other teachers not on playground duty. Someone handed him a cup of coffee, and he lost himself in the caffeine surge for a while. Back in the classroom, Hinata settled in the desk next to the one Naruto was sprawled over. His mouth was slightly open, a tiny puddle of drool forming. The little girl bit her lips so as not to giggle at how sound asleep the younger child was, somehow feeling it to be unforgivably rude. Instead, she just opened her bento box and ate quietly, waiting to see if Naruto would wake before the deadline. When he didn't, she fetched Iruka-sensei as she had been told, and went back to her lessons that afternoon thinking that Naruto was just as irrepressibly cute as her 5-year-old sister Hanabi. Asuma shook his head ruefully and signed the slip of paper officiating his decision to fail the genin team he'd been testing. Graduates shouldn't be that pathetic. His father had gotten it into his head to try and push Asuma towards a sensei position, and Asuma had gone along with it for the sake of preserving the precarious peace they had found. He looked across the room after handing the form into the appropriate desk at the Hokage Tower, and grinned to realize that a harried-looking Kakashi was doing the same thing. "Hey! Kakashi!" he called. The silver-haired man turned, and upon recognizing him raised a hand in a half-salute. "Yo! Failed another lot?" Asuma grinned. Kakashi shrugged in a you-got-me kind of way. "Pathetic lot," he said casually, unconcerned with the way the Sarutobi fell into step beside him as they paced away from the tower. The girl started crying when she grazed her knee. Asuma made the appropriate noise of incredulous disgust even as he eyed up the white bundle stowed under Kakashi's arm that could only be an ANBU captain's cloak, probably wrapped around a mask of the same. Asuma frowned to himself a little. It was no secret that Kakashi had been in ANBU, or that he had been one of the best in the program, though which ANBU was still a closely guarded secret. However, the Jounin had been under the impression that Kakashi had retired from the Corps when the mission that had borne his son was completed. Admittedly, the Hitaki had cut short a promising career for the sake of the boy, but the presence of a uniform indicated that the ANBU chapter of Kakashi's life might not be as over as the man had led everyone to believe. Perhaps Kakashi had taken advantage of the thinly spread forces to offer his manpower? Asuma's gut clenched as he remembered the Kakashi of then, the faceless, emotionless, broken teenager that Asuma had dismissed as a disliked peer, a technical comrade. That Kakashi had been jaded and unreachable and damaged beyond measure, though by what Asuma wasn't privy to. The dark-haired man surveyed his sort of friends speculatively. The little boy that Kakashi had brought home was probably the one mistake the perfect shinobi had ever made, but it was a wonderful one that had wrought significant changes in the aloof person who became a father before he was even fully into manhood. What would happen to the blonde splash of sunshine if Kakashi rejoined the dance with death that was ANBU, and one night missed a step? "Hey, Kakashi," he said impulsively as the pair wandered down the street into the busy heart of the village, not really walking together, but rather going in the same general direction at the same general time. Kakashi, off in his own little world, blinked and looked at Asuma. "HM? Yes?" he said. Asuma considered, reaching for his cigarette pack. "What'll happen to your kid, if the worst happens?" he asked bluntly, putting a white stick in his mouth and placing the box containing the rest back in his pocket. Kakashi frowned. "What brought that worry on?" he asked, almost teasing. "Do I look ill?" "You look like you're carrying your death veil around," Asuma responded with a bit of bite, and was instantly surprised at the resentment he felt on little Naruto's behalf. Kakashi looked surprised, then looked down at where he was carrying his ANBU uniform. "I'd forgotten I still had this," he admitted, rearranging the bundle so that it was flat enough to slide down the front of his vest. "I had to come straight from another mission to test the Genin group. What a waste of time." He half chuckled, before realizing that there was no humor in Asuma's face. "What's troubling you, Asuma?" "That kid of yours. He's about the age you were when your father died, isn't he?" Kakashi went still, stopping dead in the middle of the road. Asuma stopped as well, turning to face the Hitaki head-on. "What the fuck are you doing?" Kakashi said in a low, dangerous voice, unsure if he was being needled, threatened, or in some misguided way being offered some kind of bastardized support. "Just wondering if you've realized that self-destruction isn't just going to damage you anymore." Kakashi stared at him for a long moment, before suddenly realizing Asuma was worried on Naruto's account, worried that the elder Hitaki was slipping back into the highly dangerous state of mind he had lived inside up until his 16th year. That devil may care, the mission is all that matters. Perfect soldier way of thinking that had been forcibly removed when he'd found himself with a little person to care for. "The Hokage asked me to stand in on a few missions," he said abruptly. "He's so short on hands, he needs every able-bodied man with the qualifications to help out. Naruto will be provided for if anything happens." Asuma visibly relaxed, though he looked a little troubled. "Dad did always have a cold streak. You have it sorted out where the kid will go?" Kakashi nodded and the pair began moving again. "Yeah," he said, dodging around a small group of women window shopping as they entered the commercial district. "Well, I mean, he's got a godfather, and it's not like some would let him starve or whatever." There was a pause before Kakashi smiled, eye curving happily. "But I'm not planning on dying, so don't worry your head about it. Asuma chuckled, belatedly lighting his cigarette. Gotcha. Hey, d'you want to grab something to eat? I'm pretty sure we could hook up with some of the others if we look around for them. Kakashi was already shaking his head. I have to hurry to catch Naruto before he's picked up by Guy and is further traumatized. Asuma spluttered. Guy. He coughed, dropping the cigarette by accident and brushing at his sleeve to make sure it wasn't on fire. You let Guy watch him? Just for the night, Kakashi defended. I was desperate. Asuma just laughed. Dude, you need a wife, he choked through his hysterics. Kakashi grimaced. Stop arranging my life, man, he scolded. You focus on that yourself. What's this thing you've got going with Kurenai? It was remarkably fun to see a flush dance across Asuma's features. We're just friends, he said, a little too quickly. Kakashi snorted. Really? He said. I wasn't aware that just friends spent nights. He broke off as Asuma shoved him. Shut up. The man sobered again. You know, he said, you can put me down. You know, as someone to help look after your kid if you know. Internally, Asuma knew that there were few from his age group who wouldn't be up in arms, ready to shoulder the load of caring for Kakashi's son should the man not return from a mission. Kakashi stared at him for a moment, then shrugged. Thanks. What else was there to say to that? Not long thereafter, they went their separate ways, Asuma spotting Kurenai and Genma lounging under a tree next to a cafe and Kakashi making his way to the academy, heading off Guy on the way there to tell the man that he was back and thank him again for caring for Naruto. For once, the boy didn't run to meet him, and Kakashi wondered with a vague humor if he was in trouble with his son. But almost as soon as the thought had drifted through his mind, he spotted the bright-haired child speaking animatedly with a group of other children. Kiba was one of them, but as Kakashi watched he bumped Naruto in a friendly farewell, waved a hand at the others, and ran off, vaulting the academy fence and legging it in the direction of home. Quickly, the crowd dispersed, everyone heading to their own homes, until Naruto was left alone with two dark-haired children. It took Kakashi a moment to recognize them from a distance, but then the boy turned and he caught a glimpse of the lad's face. Instantly, the Jounin knew that Naruto had found Hyuga Hayashi's children. Approaching them, Kakashi tried to remember the kids' names. This was a boy and a girl, so it had to be Hayashi's heir and nephew. Hinata? Or was that the little one? The boy was easier to remember, lacking the H beginning, Niji. Good afternoon, kids, the adult said sunnily. Naruto lunged at him. Dad! Never leave me alone with Froggy-san again. He's so weird. He means well, Kakashi said casually. Did you have a good day at school? Naruto looked embarrassed. I was so tired after this morning, he admitted. Blushing red, Froggy-san took me out before school to do stuff, and I kinda fell asleep in maths. Kakashi laughed a little, even as he internally promised to chew out Guy for failing to obey his very simple instructions. Oh dear. Was Iruka-sensei very mad? No, Naruto looked delighted. I thought he was gonna be furious, but he just let me sleep and then kept me in when Mizuki-sensei took the class outside to do taijutsu so's I could do the work I missed. Hinata-chan and Niji-kun were keeping me company till you got here. Ah, so it was Hinata. So what was her sister's name? That was very kind of them, Kakashi said genially, looking at where the girl was going so red he was vaguely worried her head might explode. The boy watched him coolly. Niji-kun. Kakashi chose his target. How old are you now? 10, sir, came the polite reply. Not long now until you graduate. 2 years, sir. No change in tone or expression. I hear you're quite talented, Kakashi fished. One of Niji's shoulders twitched the tiniest amount. Not so exceptionally for my family, sir. That was said without conceit. He wasn't boasting of his clan's skills. Rather, he had an inferiority complex. How cute. Really? Your uncle tells me otherwise. He brings you up frequently in our conversations and talks about your progress with pride. And it wasn't even a lie. Hayashi spoke glowingly of his nephew. Oh, a change. A flicker of utmost surprise, followed by a wave of clear pleasure at the news. Niji's pale eyes broke contact with his own and he looked at his feet, suddenly a little bashful. "Thank you for telling me, sir," he whispered. Kakashi smirked. He dropped the matter for now, but it had been fun to push a reaction out of the little Hayashi clone. "Well, since you waited for me, why don't I treat the three of you to some food?" he suggested, rightly guessing that Naruto had slept right through lunch. Naruto's eyes lit up, but Hinata and Niji hesitated. Thank you for the affair, Hahataki-sama," Hinata squeaked, "but we have to be getting home." "Then we'll walk you," Kakashi said simply, taking Naruto's hand out of force of habit. Naruto tugged at the limb, clearly not liking the obvious highlighting of his youth in front of his classmates, but soon gave it up and grabbed Hinata's hand with his free one. Hinata blushed. "Yeah. We'll take you home," the little Hataki said. Thank you," Hinata stuttered, shyly slipping her free hand into one of Niji's. Kakashi bit his lip to avoid laughing at the look on the boy's face, but the branch member Hyuga didn't pull away, consenting to walk down the street as part of the little chain. Delivering the children home turned into staying for afternoon tea, which turned into an invitation to dinner that Kakashi, having no idea what else he'd feed his kid tonight, and knowing that he'd resort to takeaways, accepted. It was well and truly dark by the time he gathered a slumbering Naruto into his arms and finished the journey home, bidding Hayashi goodbye at the gate of the vast Hyuga compound. He never even considered the possible repercussions of all that had happened in the last 48 hours. Chapter 8: Threads in a Tapestry. 8 years old? Naruto sighed heavily and leant back in his chair, staring at the ceiling while all around him, his classmates frantically scribbled down notes from the board. On his left, Kiba was making entertaining moaning noises, like he was being slowly tortured to death, as he wrote messily, and his new puppy, Akamaru, snored, fast asleep on his desk. "Naruto! Have you gotten this down?" Naruto jerked violently at the accusing shout from his teacher, and slowly brought his gaze down to meet the Chunin's gaze. "Iruka-sensei, it's boring," he whined. "I already know this stuff." The tan Chunin raised a dark eyebrow. "Oh, so you'll be happy to demonstrate a perfect bunshin for the class then?" A light flush dusted Naruto's cheeks. He couldn't do this jutsu, and the feeling was one he wasn't used to. He didn't like it, not at all. "There's a difference between theory and reality," he said reluctantly. "I know the theory. You've already taught it to us." He winced as the short-tempered teacher twitched, and braced himself for. "If you can't do it, then be quiet and learn. The only reason you find this jutsu so difficult is because you try to rush in and do it without fully understanding what it is you are attempting. Now be quiet and copy this down." Naruto nodded meekly and sank down into his chair. "Yes, sensei, sorry, sensei," he said. He waited until Iruka had turned back to the board before slumping over his desk and rolling his eyes at Kiba. "Ah, the ever-famous Iruka-sensei blow up. Lesson isn't complete without it," he drawled quietly. On his right, Nara Shikamaru sighed loudly. "Does he have to shout?" he asked lazily, also laying his head on the desk. "Man, school is such a drag." "For once, I agree with you, Shikabuddy," Kiba grinned. He put a sympathetic hand on Naruto's shoulder. "Don't worry, kid, you'll get it. This jutsu's a hard one." Naruto wrinkled his nose. "It's E-ranked," he whined. Then annoyance flitted across his face. "And you don't need to baby me," he informed the 10-year-old crossly. "I may be younger than you, but there's a reason I'm in this class. I'm not 5 years old anymore." Kiba, of course, took no notice and just grinned in an infuriatingly knowing way. Reaching around Shikamaru, the Nara's best friend Akamichi Tsuji shook his bag of crisps at the blonde. "Don't mind him," the brunette said, mouth full. "Want a chip?" The scowl slid off Naruto's face like water off a duck's back as he took a handful of the salty, fatty items his father never let him eat. There were some perks to being the baby of the group. After all, he was the only one Tsuji would let eat his food. All four friends ducked as a piece of chalk flew to the back row where they were sitting and clinked off the wall behind them. "Pay attention back there." At that exact moment, there was a pop and a small cloud of smoke. A man dressed in a shinobi uniform appeared behind Naruto and grabbed his collar, hoisting him aloft and ignoring the blonde's squawk. "Yo! I'm stealing Naruto. See you. Wait, Hataki-san! Irika shouted instantly. You can't take him now, we're practicing the Bunshin no Jutsu, and Naruto's struggling with it, so he really can't afford to. It was no use. With another cloud of soft white smoke, the man and boy disappeared, leaving Kiba sneezing and glaring at the spot his friend had, until recently, been sitting. Irika sighed. I hate that man, he muttered. Most of the class nodded in agreement. Several blocks away, Naruto grinned up at his tall, silver-haired kidnapper. Cool. Perfect timing, Dad. Legend, he grinned, quickly stuffing the chips in his hand into his mouth and wiping the grease off on his pants. Kakashi rolled a single eye, then smiled. How you been, pup? He asked, putting an arm around Naruto's shoulders and tugging him close with rough affection. Good. Naruto swallowed painfully and continued, grinning broadly, I've been pretty much the same. What was your mission like? Was it awesome? Did ya beat up lots of bad guys? Did you save anyone? Did you get hurt? When did you get home? Earlier today, Kakashi said tolerantly. I've been cleared for leave for this next week or so, and I thought you and I could go on another one of our little adventures. Naruto's entire face lit up at the prospect. Every now and again since he'd begun the academy, Kakashi had taken to grabbing him and just leaving. The Hokage approved these trips, partly because it offered valuable father-slash-son bonding time, partly because it gave Kakashi a perfect opportunity to expose Naruto to life outside the village in a safe way and teach him some useful skills, and partly because it got angry academy teachers off his back whenever the youngest Hatake got bored and experimented. Kakashi would take his son around the countryside, stopping at random locations, though they had yet to actually cross the border. Kakashi supposed he'd leave that excitement for after Naruto graduated. Yeah! The boy cheered instantly, half tackling his father. Awesome! Where are we going? Quiet! Kakashi barked, smirking as Naruto instantly snapped his mouth shut. First, we're going home to get our bags, and then we're going south. Kakashi sighed and looked longingly towards the steam rising off the baths that were just there behind that wooden fence. He was tired, muddy, sore all over and was struggling under the weight of the paternal code of honor that dictated that he swallow down all of his discomfort and keep smiling. It was early evening in the quiet little bath town that Kakashi had selected as a base of operations for at least the first part of this little trip. Naruto was still going strong, showing no signs of tiring as he turned cartwheels in the little garden they'd spent most of today. Kakashi looked around carefully, making sure there was no one in or around the pretty little place. There wasn't. The woman who ran this little resort had even closed the wooden doors leading from the pavilion adjacent into the garden itself. Probably because she had received complaints about the noise a rambunctious little boy could make, Kakashi thought guiltily. In any event, they were alone. With a noise of relief, he tugged the smothering mask down off his face and unzipped his shinobi vest, dumping the green piece of clothing on the grass next to a flowering cherry blossom tree. He dropped his hatayate on top of it and rubbed a hand through his gray hair to try and dispel a bit of his headache. Naruto had, it seemed, tired of his cartwheeling stint and had turned back to serious matters, which was the stern study of the E-rank Jutsu Bunshin. Apparently the skies would fall and the seas would boil and Naruto would die if he didn't learn it right now, and Kakashi had accordingly spent all day trying to teach the boy it. Frankly, he didn't understand why the kid was having so much trouble with it. He had no problem with the bigger, stronger or more difficult jutsu Kakashi had taught him, and the fact that a simple Bunshin was Naruto's undoing was baffling to the jounin. Okay, the adult said, still carting fingers through his hair, let's try again. I just can't do it. Naruto whined, sounding perilously close to tears. Kakashi smiled a little, trying to be reassuring even as he settled cross-legged on the ground. Some things are harder than others, pup, he said. Even I have trouble learning certain things. Some jutsu I never quite get the hang of. Yeah, right. His peevish son shot back. Yeah, right, Kakashi agreed, his tone a polar opposite to the one Naruto had used. The blonde pouted, unconvinced. Like what? He demanded sulkily. Rasengan, Kakashi thought. Kawarimi, Kakashi lied. Naruto scowled at him. You're a liar, Dad. I've seen you kawarimi 100 times. Kakashi grinned unrepentantly. Okay, you got me. But I'm not kidding when I say I've wept frustrated tears over not being able to complete a dozen super cool jutsu. Naruto seemed to have read the truth in his father's voice, and plunked onto the grass in front of him. Like what? He asked again. Kakashi shook his head. No. You're not learning about any of them until you're old enough to drink. Naruto gave him a cheeky grin. You do realize that if you teach me this super hard stuff when I'm old enough to drink, you're teaching me super hard stuff when I'm old enough to try them drunk, right? He asked. Kakashi considered. You're right. I'm never telling you. What? No, Dad, that's not fair. The child complained. Kakashi laughed and ruffled wild blonde hair. Sorry, kiddo. Naruto jumped at him then, hollering something or another, and Kakashi let himself be tackled. For a while, they rolled and tumbled and played a rough game only understood by boys and puppies, adding more aches to Kakashi's body and sting to his headache and mud to his clothes. The father found he didn't mind so terribly as he listened to Naruto's unchecked giggling as he was hoisted over his father's shoulder in a fireman's hold. Kakashi ambled a few swaying steps, tossing his son back and forth with the motion, before dumping him on his head on the ground. The blonde was up and attacking again in a heartbeat, so fast in fact that Kakashi wondered, not for the first time, if the kid was part bouncy ball. Perhaps Minato-sensei had sealed a bouncy demon into the kid instead of a... Kakashi froze. Kyuubi. One thing that Kakashi hadn't considered in his entire career as Naruto's guardian was the effect the demon would have on the boy. In truth, he rarely thought about Kyuubi these days, rarely remembered that this whole relationship, his whole world, was a facade, a lie, a mission. Setting aside the sour taste that filled his mouth at the thought of his son's, of Naruto's inevitable reaction to the discovery of the truth, he focused on the consideration of the demon. Surely it would have some effect on Naruto. Sooner or later it was going to rear its ugly head and Kakashi would have some explaining to do. But this was too soon, too early. Naruto was too young to tell him the truth about his heritage. It would destroy the child, destroy me too. Again, Kakashi shook away his thoughts before they led somewhere dangerous, somewhere he hadn't visited in years. Carefully compartmentalizing his thinking, he focused on the matter of Kyuubi and his son. Naruto, try to make a bunshin again, he ordered. Naruto deflated. I can't, Daddy. Kakashi put an arm around the 8-year-old and gave him a rough squeeze. Just try for me, okay? I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to help you. Naruto sighed, exasperation in his entire body, but got to his feet and put his hands together in front of him. He quickly ran through practice seals to make a bunshin, and Kakashi opened his Sharingan eye to watch carefully. He felt a horrible jolt in his stomach region as Naruto focused his chakra and his body lit up with the energy, a red ball lighting up and roiling angrily in the boy's stomach. Kyuubi. Bunshin! Naruto called, and his chakra surged to fuel the jutsu. For a moment, Kakashi was afraid that the squirming red energy would break from that condensed spot and rage through the little boy's system, but it didn't, staying firmly where it had been put. The problem wasn't Kyuubi then. So what was the problem? Naruto's hand seals had been perfect for years now, and he could summon up his chakra easily enough. There was no reason why he shouldn't be creating bunshin as easy as breathing. It's hopeless, Naruto complained, shoulders slumping in defeat. Kakashi frowned, moving to kneel before his son to get a better look. Try again. Dad. Just trust me, Naruto. Please. Naruto grumbled, but consented to once more go through the motions of creating a clone. Kakashi watched carefully, this time ignoring the red chakra of a demon and focusing on the blue chakra of his son. It ran wild through the small body, through unusually large checkpoints, a wild river where most people had gentle streams. Wait. Blue. Naruto's chakra was blue. Blue, like a normal, average, everyday shinobi. He wasn't Kakashi's son by birth. Of course he hadn't inherited his father's white chakra. Kakashi barely bit back the urge to slap himself on the forehead and groan at his own idiocy. White chakra, the Hataki Kekkai Genkai, was not as flashy as the Mokuton, or as well advertised as the Sharingan, and indeed there were a large number of people who would argue that it wasn't a true Kekkai Genkai at all any more than brown eyes or long fingers or large chakra banks were, but it was useful to a fault anyway. White chakra was essentially highly condensed energy, twice or 3 times as dense as the regular stuff. In essence, a measure of white chakra could go twice or 3 times as far as the same amount of regular or blue chakra. Kakashi knew this. He also knew that Naruto had blue chakra. Yet he taught the boy the same lessons he himself had learned as a child, lessons that should be out of reach of a normal child simply because of the chakra requirements. But Naruto had shown no ill effects. And Kyuubi wasn't affecting Naruto's chakra system, yet. Still nothing. Again. But. Again. Naruto looked taken aback at the sharp tone. He pouted but ducked his head and obeyed. Kakashi watched, closing his own eye and looking through Obito's. Again, he watched the boy's chakra surge, again he watched it die down. He growled in frustration. Okay, new plan, he said, not even pausing to acknowledge Naruto's remorseful expression, much less offer comfort. I want you to focus your chakra for me, okay? Just focus it like you're about to do a jutsu. But don't actually do anything, okay? Naruto frowned at his dad, not liking his suddenly demanding and impatient manner. Dad never got like this. Instead of arguing, though, he placed his hand before him in the ram's seal and focused his chakra like he'd been told. Kakashi once again looked him over. Now that it wasn't surging and dropping quite as erratically, he could have a good look. It didn't take long before he realized exactly what the problem was. Shit. For a few moments, that was all Kakashi could see. Shit. Double wow. That's big. He looked again, just to be sure. He had to have inherited that from Kushina. Even Sensei never had that much. Whoa. Naruto was teeming with chakra. Twice, no 4 times, maybe even 8, 10, 20 times Kakashi's own capacity. Already. The boy was 8. That explained a lot. Dad? Dad, are you okay? Naruto broke concentration to ask his father, who'd paled suddenly and gone very, very still. Dad? He reached out to touch the man's shoulder, and Kakashi blinked, coming back to himself with a thump. Okay, what to tell him? After a moment of wildly spinning thoughts, Kakashi had gathered himself, assimilated the new knowledge and thought of an explanation to feed his son and the world in general. He smiled and drew to his feet, placing a hand on Naruto's head to ruffle his hair affectionately. I see the problem, he said brightly. Naruto looked partly hopeful, partly full of dread. Yes, he said with trepidation. Kakashi smiled more. Your control is not the best, he fibbed. In fact, Naruto's control had to be much better, proportionally, than most in order to even vaguely direct the ocean of chakra he had within him. Naruto's blue eyes darkened. But how can I? I don't know. I'm not putting enough into it? He guessed. Kakashi laughed a little. The opposite, kid, he said brightly. You're putting way too much into your clones. Naruto's frown looked like a pout on his young face. But I'm using a tiny bit, like you taught me for Henji and Kawarimi. Kakashi nodded. Yes, but with those, a little extra juice doesn't really affect too much, he said lightly. A bunshin, you can overload. You're cooking them, Naru. Why? The question was plaintive, and full of a desperate need to know. Kakashi felt a twinge of guilt for the lie he was about to spin, but pushed it aside easily. White chakra, kiddo. What can you tell me about it? Naruto looked surprised at the sudden topic change but replied anyway. The Hataki Kekkai Genkai? Dense chakra, goes further than regular stuff. You use it to power your cool stuff when other people can't cause it would totally drain them. He trailed off, looking hopefully at the adult to see if that was enough. Kakashi took pity. You're my son. You have my chakra. A good-sized reservoir at that. To use it, you need a great deal of control. You don't have quite the level of control needed to give out so little chakra. Internally, Kakashi cringed at the lie in a way no seasoned shinobi ever should. He comforted himself with the thought that his story wasn't completely bull. Some parts were truth, or almost truth, at least. Can you teach me? Naruto was asking hopefully. To have better control? Kakashi shook his head. No, kid. That's something that can't be taught. You might improve it a bit with practice, but I doubt you could increase it so drastically. Don't worry, you won't need anything so fine-tuned outside of the academy, unless you want to be a medic. Which you don't last time I checked. Naruto's face screwed up in dismay. But I'm in the academy. He half-wailed. And I won't graduate until I know this stupid jutsu. And if I don't get it soon, Irika-sensei will put me back in Akemi-sensei's class with the babies. Kakashi fought valiantly to keep his straight face. He was a shinobi, damn it. He should be able to keep himself from laughing at the troubles in his son's life. Don't worry, he said before the kid could work himself into hysteria. I'll teach you something better. If you don't tell anyone, Irika-sensei won't know the difference. Naruto's eyes lit up. Really, Dad? He gushed. I love you. Kakashi smiled again. I know, he said lightly. Now, have you ever heard of a jutsu called Kage Bunshin? It was 11:30 at night. It had been a very long day. Naruto had, finally, agreed to go to bed, having been too intent on learning the Kage Bunshin jutsu to rest until his father had literally threatened hellfire raining down upon the boy should he continue to disobey the adult's commands for him to brush his teeth and change into his pajamas. Eventually, 3 pajama-clad Narutos, chattering excitedly, had jumped on the bed and started bouncing. Kakashi, losing patience, had come up behind them and hit them one by one on the head. 2 vanished, 1 said ow. Kakashi fingered his kunai pouch and longingly thought of the sedative powder that he could use so easily, but that wouldn't be right. A pox on you, morals! Go to sleep, he growled through gritted teeth. Naruto didn't even seem to hear. This is so cool I can do it dijasi and now just wait until I get home Irika-sensei is gonna be like show me a bunshin and I'm gonna be like, waiting in line, and we'll get to my turn and he'll be all like, okay, Naruto give it your best go and I'll be like Kage Bunshin, and poof. And then there'll be a million clones and sensei will. Naruto! The shout got through to the excited blonde, and he finally fell silent. Kakashi took a deep breath to calm himself down, mentally pulling up stored images of how angelic and cute Naruto really was, underneath this bratish disobedience so late at night. Keeping the picture of Angel Naruto firmly in his mind, he exhaled and spoke in a level voice. I have asked you countless times to go to bed, Naruto. I am getting very tired of your behavior tonight. I know you're excited, and you've done well to learn the jutsu so quickly, but now it is time for sleep. It is he glanced at his watch, 4 hours past your bedtime. Now I am going to give you 2 minutes, 120 seconds, to get a glass of water, go to the bathroom, do anything else you need to do before bed, and get under the covers. Go on. Naruto skittered off the bed like he'd been burned, and Kakashi took the moment without his child to lean against the wall of the hired hotel room they were staying in, and wonder if he was ever going to get to sleep tonight. He barely had time to form the thought when the blonde came racing back out of the adjacent bathroom with a glass of water he'd filled from the sink tap in there. Setting the glass on the bedside table, he slid into bed and threw the covers over himself, then looked at his father to see if the adult was still mad. Kakashi sighed. Sleep well, son, he said, kissing the boy lightly on the forehead. I'll see you in the morning. Night, Dad, Naruto whispered back as if afraid to speak aloud for fear of starting his excited babble again. Kakashi, recognizing that his son was nowhere near ready to sleep, sighed heavily and sat on the edge of the bed, tugging Naruto's shoulder to get the boy to roll over onto his stomach. When the 8-year-old was settled, he pulled the covers down and placed a hand on Naruto's back, rubbing gently. Well done today, Naru, he said quietly. I'm proud of you. The boy fairly thrummed with excitement at the words, so Kakashi quickly changed track. Would you like me to tell you a story? When I was about your age, you know that I was on a Genin Shunin squad, remember? Minato-sensei was trying to teach us a water jutsu good for filling empty dams and wells, important in war times, you see. My teammate Obito. He quickly wove the tale, shamelessly preying on the fact that his son adored being told stories, idolized the yondaime, thrilled at war tales, and always settled down to listen when Kakashi began one. Coupled with the soothing petting and the way Kakashi cleverly made the tale more boring towards the end, less gripping once Naruto had begun to realize how tired he was, and it wasn't long before he was talking to a soundly sleeping child. Finally, just as the clock was chirping midnight, Naruto was bedded down for the night. With the evening's end sigh, the adult stood up and wandered around the room a little, before just falling into bed himself. Well. Fancy meeting you here, kid? Kakashi closed his eye. Crap. Hello, Jiraiya, he said resignedly. The large man was seated on the grass facing the large wooden fence marking the edge of the women's bath. More importantly, it was the edge of the spa's property, too, so as long as he kept from leaning on the fence, the staff could not tell him to move along. Jiraiya knew all the tricks of his trade. So, brat, he said, leaning back and tucking his pencil into his long ponytailed hair. Come to realize the wisdom of my counsel, have you? Kakashi sighed. I'm not here to spy on women, he said flatly. Jiraiya seemed to weigh his truthfulness for a moment before scoffing in disgust. You know, if it weren't for that kid of yours, brat, I'd say you were gay. Actually. Again, the man seemed to weigh him, if somewhat mockingly. Kakashi glared. Goodbye, Jiraiya. Adjusting his grip on the groceries he'd bought, he stalked on his way. Hey, wait, kid, I was just teasing. Naruto's godfather labored to his feet and caught up with the offended Hitaki in 3 long strides. Man, some people have no sense of humor. I haven't tried to gut you yet, have I? Kakashi remarked dryly without stopping. The man chuckled. So why are you here? He pressed, peeking at the bag in the shinobi's arm, with groceries you would never buy to restock mid-mission. I mean, animal-shaped crackers? Really? Kakashi snatched the packet back. You have to feed kids something, he snapped. Crackers make a good snack for hungry children. Animal-shaped because, despite what people grumble drunkenly about me in pubs, I am not altogether intent on leeching everything fun from the world. Jiraiya's eyes lit up. Naruto? He said eagerly. You have Naruto with you? Kakashi surveyed him sourly. What do you care? The Sannin looked taken aback, so Naruto's father added a surly, yeah, he's here. Now stop following me. Not a chance, brat. And just like that, Kakashi found his son's godfather stuck on his 6 as he made his way back to the room where he had left a still sleeping Naruto, though he would be very surprised if the boy was still asleep, no matter how late he'd been up last night. He probably won't recognize you, the Hitaki commented over his shoulder in a warning of sorts. It's been a long time since your last visit, and he was very young back then. He didn't look back, so he didn't see Jiraiya's partially guilty, partially worried wince. Soon they arrived at the hired room, and Kakashi fiddled with his luggage until he had a hand spare to unlock the door and push it open. Naruto was sitting on the floor inside, attempting to assemble a puzzle that he'd clearly found somewhere in the room. Blue eyes looked up when the adults entered, each waiting with bated breath to see the boy's reaction. Erojiji? Naruto's tone was shocked. Jiraiya had just enough time to shoot a triumphant look in Kakashi's direction before the blonde boy continued, I thought you were dead. That stopped the big man short. Dead? He repeated. Why did you think I was? Did your father tell you that? Naruto snorted, as if the notion was ridiculous. Dad doesn't talk about you, he said dismissively. But you haven't visited since I was, what for? I figured you were dead. I'm sorry, Jiraiya said sincerely. My work doesn't let me get back home to Konoha much, or I would have visited more. Naruto shrugged, eyes fixed on the bag Kakashi was holding, whatever fleeting interest he'd had in the conversation lost. Hey, Dad, what did you get? Can I see? Kakashi held the bag out of reach, but dipped a hand into it, and drew out the packet of animal crackers that the Sannin had ridiculed a few minutes before, tossing it in the child's direction. Awesome! Thanks, Dad! Kakashi sent Jiraiya a look that said told you so. Jiraiya grinned. Hey, kid, what did you say to coming to hang out with me today? The father made a convulsive move and a noise of protest, but Naruto, while not exactly lighting up like a beaming beacon, certainly looked partial to the idea. Yeah, okay. Can I, Dad? Kakashi sighed and, against his better judgment, folded. You have 2 hours, he said to the boy's godfather. A minute or two later, both eldest and youngest male were gone. Jiraiya smiled at the kid. Quite suddenly, an expression of horror passed over the clone's face, and it disappeared with a flash of smoke, followed by every Naruto in sight. The Sannin had just enough time to let a bad feeling grow ominously in his stomach before his sharp ears located the sound of tears. A bystander would have been flatly amazed at how fast the large, older-looking gentleman had managed to move in that instant, and Jiraiya was kneeling by a collapsed, sodden Naruto in less than a second, trying to pry the small hands away from where they were up to protect or hide the child's face. Naruto! Naruto, what happened? Where are you hurt? With his insistent urging, Naruto inched his hands down his face, revealing first eyes streaming with pain, tears that made his godfather's heart lurch before drawing below his chin and allowing the adult to see the blood trickling from his mouth with a steady flow. Jiraiya thought he was going to be sick. Naruto's lips moved, and sound garbled by the injury came out while a blood-smudged hand indicated off to his left. Jiraiya had no hope of deciphering any of these by itself, but together they made enough of speech for him to understand, and he followed the boy's gesturing to spy a mossy log set across the pretty, serene little creek that Naruto had slumped on the bank of. It was right next to a picturesque footbridge, complete with ornamental handrails. You were trying to walk over the log, the big man guessed, hating the fresh tears that slid down his godson's cheeks, over a bruise that was already blackening. It was too slippery, and you fell and hit your face on the railing. Naruto nodded, trying to put up hands to nurse his sore face again, but Jiraiya caught his hands in one large one and used the other to gently search for the injury that was bleeding, ignoring Naruto's flinches and whimpering. Open your mouth up, Naru, he commanded gently. Naruto obeyed, and something white and small tumbled through his lips and into his lap. The adult froze. Shit, he said aloud. Your dad's gonna kill me. He composed himself, turning back to the hurt 8-year-old. Okay, it's okay, Naruto, he soothed. You knocked a tooth loose is all. Have you ever lost a tooth before? It's just a baby tooth, it will grow back. Naruto nodded. He'd lost his first tooth at the tender age of 4 and 8 months, and was an old hand at the process by now. The tears stung his eyes, and he wished he'd stopped being a baby, but this hurt. He sniffed, desperately wanting his father, wanting anyone who would hug him and tell him everything was all right. He yelped in surprise when his godfather gathered him in one sweep of massive arms and pressed him close to a broad chest, hugging him tightly but gingerly. It's okay, kid, the Sannin grunted, petting golden hair. You're all right. Let's go rinse your mouth out, you'll be fine. They did just that, Jiraiya carefully helping Naruto to rinse the blood out of his mouth with water from the Sannin's water bottle, and giving the boy some paracetamol and ibuprofen, 2 garden variety painkillers that would be more than sufficient to deal with Naruto's missing tooth. Kakashi smelt it before he saw it. He was reclining in one of the spa's many baths, struggling against the twin feelings of anxiety and relief over the fact that Jiraiya was watching over his child. He's a Sannin, the Hatake thought to himself. He practically raised sensei. He can handle one 8-year-old for a few hours. Blast, I'm not supposed to be glad to be rid of the child for a couple of hours. I'm an awful parent. The self-flagellation was brought to an appropriate halt when Kakashi's sharp nose caught a familiar coppery smell that was an old friend to those in the shinobi profession. Blood. An instant later, his son came into the steamy enclosure, and Kakashi went cold when he saw the tear tracks on his young face, the long-dried crimson substance clinging stubbornly to his features and neck. What happened? He demanded, sloshing water as he moved to the side of the pool. He would have climbed out, but Naruto was already there and grinning as he splashed the bathwater. Naruto, where are you hurt? What happened? Tell me. Naruto opened his mouth with a distinctly proud tilt to his head, a finger highlighting a gap that Kakashi couldn't remember being there that morning. I lost a tooth, the boy announced. I slipped and knocked it right out, see? Again, the father was treated to the sight of the inside of the child's mouth. Slowly, allowing himself time to process, Kakashi turned his gaze to a sheepish and apprehensive Jiraiya, standing on the edge of the pool. Naruto stopped fingering the new gap by his mouth as the tension built, and looked between the adults staring one another down. After a long moment he spoke up, putting a hand on his father's water-slick arm and saying, "Dad? It was an accident. Promise me you won't fight with Arojiji? It wasn't his fault. Honest." Kakashi glanced at his child, then looked back at the other man. He was angry, but it was a cold anger. "I won't hurt him, or try to, Naruto," he said evenly, keeping eye contact with Jiraiya. "But your godfather is never, ever looking after you again. Ever." Jiraiya winced, but supposed he'd gotten off lightly, all things considered. He tried to talk the Hatake around later, when the man had been given a chance to cool off. Maybe in a year or so. Kakashi, meanwhile, dismissed the Sannin and turned to fussing over his child, carefully helping the little blonde erase the signs of the trauma. With any luck, the legendary pain in Kakashi's neck would leave soon, and he and his son would be back to their play. Little Miss Harino Sakura was getting dressed. She frowned at the mirror, trying to find the best way to arrange the pretty green ribbon to keep her hair up in such a way that didn't accent her overlarge forehead. Mummy was forever telling her that she was beautiful and not to worry, but mothers had to do that. Besides, she had to impress Sasuke-kun. It was important. The 10-year-old made some final adjustments to her hairstyle and slipped into pale pink sandals, and was ready. "Bye, Mum," she called as she ran down the stairs, grabbing up her pink backpack and racing for the door. "Sakura!" Mummy called after her. "Wait a moment. You haven't eaten any breakfast, dear." Sakura hesitated, sneaking back into the kitchen and sniffing the wonderful smell of pancakes and bacon. It smelled wonderful, but it looked greasy and fatty and full of stuff that couldn't be good for her. And Ino Pig had been making nasty comments about how much she weighed lately. She'd never make Sasuke-kun like her if she pigged out on food like that. "No, thanks, Mum," she smiled. "I'll grab an apple, but I'm late, so I'd better go. See you." Snatching up a green apple from the bowl on the counter, the little girl raced for the door again, pretending not to hear her mother calling after her. Left behind, Haruno-san shook her head at the departed child. "Late?" the woman said incredulously, looking at the clock. "School doesn't start for another 2 hours." Outside, Sakura slowed to a walk and bit contemplatively into her apple as she shrugged her backpack better onto her back. Konoha was already bustling despite the early hour, a side effect of having a 2-to-1 shinobi to civilian ratio. She could head to school, or to a training ground for a while, or the park, or just hang around the village for a while. Deciding that it was too early to train and she didn't want to mess up her hair anyway, the park was for babies and the village this early tended to be filled with overly busy people who shouted when she got in their way, Sakura decided to head to school, where she could lose herself in study and impress Iruka-sensei with her dedication. It was very early. There was only one other student there, swinging quietly on the swing in the yard. Sakura waved vaguely to the small boy and continued on into the school, pleased to find the doors unlocked as if just for her. She busily stowed her bag in her locker and pulled out the books she wanted to study. She thought she'd focus on the shinobi laws today. There were so many of them, and she had to know every one in an instant if asked. "Ah!" A cry of alarm made her jump. Sakura looked around. The hallway was empty, but the cry had come from the classroom. It had been deep, an adult male, Iruka-sensei? Maybe he's in trouble, Sakura thought, making up her mind to go check it out. She crept forward silently, using the skills she had learned in this building with pride as she went to the rescue of her teacher. Reaching the classroom, she peeked in through a crack in the door. "It's no use," Iruka was saying, arms crossed defensively over his chest. He had his back mostly to the door, facing off against. Sakura's heart caught in her throat. A man in a brown cloak and a white porcelain mask. An Anbu. Why does an Anbu want to talk to Iruka-sensei? She wondered. The Anbu tilted his head. "It's no use," Iruka-sensei repeated insistently. "You can stand there until the cows come home. I can't help you. He's not here." His father took him again. The Anbu made a frustrated noise. Hataki-san is too reckless, the masked man complained. How are we to deal with these threats if the child is not here for us to protect? Iruka-sensei sighed as if hugely put upon. It's not my fault, he said. It's ridiculous, the Anbu continued as if he hadn't heard. It's completely irresponsible. You're preaching to the choir, Anbu-san, Iruka cut through the scolding firmly. But I cannot stop or help the situation. I strongly advise Hataki-san against taking his child away, but there's no reasoning with him. The Anbu huffed, even though he privately thought that the Hataki kid would probably be well enough protected under his father's watch. Well, when will he be back? He demanded. Iruka-sensei shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine, he said. He might be back tomorrow, he might not be back for another month. Behind the door, Sakura frowned. Why was an Anbu bullying Iruka-sensei about Hataki Naruto? The kid was out of school as often as he was in it, but that wasn't Iruka-sensei's fault. And why would it be important enough for an Anbu to be involved? The Anbu shook his head. Well, consider yourself notified, anyway, he said. And keep a close watch on the Uchiha for a while, he's a risk as well. Until we can find and neutralize the threat, I'd advise having eyes on him at all times. Iruka nodded. Having eyes was a military way of saying always have a clear view of him. When the little Hataki gets back, much the same. Then of course you should watch the clan heirs. The Anbu paused, and gave out the strong impression of a grin. You have one hell of a class, Iruka-sensei. Uchiha, Hyuga, Aburame. Inuzuka, Hataki, Yamanaka, yes I know, Iruka-sensei snapped, sounding even more irritable than he did when dealing with Kiba. Every clan heir, in my class. It's a security nightmare. The Anbu mask tilted towards Sakura for a moment, and she stopped breathing, suddenly terrified the elite ninja had spotted her. But then he just made a faint sound that might have been laughter, and kept talking. You get no sympathy from us. But you do get a whole squad stationed around the academy for security. We've got no way of knowing who they're after. Best guesses include the Uchiha or maybe Hyuga, but there's no sense in leaving the others unprotected. The little girl never spotted the way the masked man's eyes lingered with amusement on the classroom door she was sheltering behind. Iruka-sensei sighed. Fine, fine. Then his brown eyes sharpened and he looked at the Anbu with a moment of suspicion. If that's the case, why are you worried about Naruto-kun? He demanded. The Anbu shrugged. Well, it's complicated. Basically, his father is a much-liked man within the village walls, and a much-hated one without. It is possible this is a grudge-driven affair, in which case, this time, the possible candidates are him, or the Uchiha. Again, the impression of a grin radiated from the man. Isn't that just what you want to hear, Iruka-sensei? Iruka-sensei sighed heavily, the image of a man burdened with too much to possibly cope. To the letter, Anbu-san. I'll section off the boys if Naruto-kun comes back before you fix this. I'll get Mizuki-sensei and Akemi-sensei to look out for the clan kids when they're out of class, at break and the like, and I'll come up with something to keep Sasuke-kun close by at break. The Anbu gave a short bow. Thank you, Iruka-sensei. That is all we need. With luck, this will be resolved in a few days' time. We are sorry for the inconvenience until then. Sakura felt the stirrings of panic in her chest. Something horrid was happening, something that could involve all the shinobi clan members in her class. Something that involved Sasuke-kun. She didn't quite understand what was happening, but resolved then and there not to let her precious Sasuke-kun out of her sight from that moment on. The Anbu straightened up and glanced at the door yet again. Sakura stiffened in fear as he made a soft noise like a chuckle. Sorry for startling you, Iruka-sensei, he said, referring to the girly shriek he had frightened out of the Chunin at the start of this conversation. Iruka scowled at the mild amusement in the man's tone. Don't look now, but we have an audience. Might want to look to that. Iruka-sensei opened his mouth to reply, possibly with a snide remark about that warning being half a confidential conversation too late, and they both knew it, but the Anbu disappeared in a flicker of displaced air. The teacher sighed. You can come in now, Sakura, he called without looking back. The little girl crept sheepishly into the room. Now Iruka-sensei said, turning to look at her, you know you're not to talk about this, right? He took in the half-scared, half-stubborn look on his student's face and sighed again. Iruka knew he had his work cut out for him explaining that these sorts of threats were fairly common and not to cause too much alarm without actually telling the unauthorized child as much. Sit down, Sakura-kun. Chapter 9 Sniffles. 9 years old. Naruto bit his lip and checked his watch. Dad was late, even for Dad, and Naruto was beginning to wonder if maybe he should have gone home with Kiba after all. He glanced back at the academy, but it was dark inside, so even the teachers had probably gone home. His head throbbed a little, like it did when Sim smacked him around the ears with a textbook during supervised homework time, and he shook it, trying to dislodge the headache. Dad hadn't mentioned anything about being away tonight, but even though at 9 years old most of his classmates could walk home by themselves, Naruto knew well enough that he was absolutely not to leave the academy until Dad showed up, unless with Kiba or a teacher, or a shinobi who told Naruto the password. So the blonde retreated to the lonely swing hung from a tree in the corner of the playground and waited. As the shadows grew longer, Naruto began to get an uncomfortable feeling in his belly to join the throbbing in his head. His dad ran perpetually about an hour late, being a shinobi in high demand, but he had never been this late for Naruto before. Other people, sure, the most memorable being that time he'd left Genma waiting on a corner for a SEC that lasted more than 24 hours, but never Naruto. What if something had gone wrong on a mission? Had he even had a mission today? Maybe. But what would Naruto do if... Niji-kun, you are lacking in youthful vigor. This is truly sad, that one so young has no knowledge of the garden and springtime of youth. Lee, we must endeavor to teach your teammate of the joys of youth and life. Naruto jumped as the swing reached its pinnacle, landing on his feet lightly, and moved to the chain-link fence. Clambering to the top of it, he looked down the road in the direction of the noise. Mato guy, preaching to a group of kids who were like 12 years old. Is that a genin team? Froggy has a genin team? Those poor kids. The blonde had to giggle when the group grew close enough that he could recognize Hyuga Niji as the boy guy was preaching to. And there was a disturbing creation right next to the green beast that looked, well, like a clone henge small. Froggy-san, Naruto said reflexively as the group reached him, jumping down to the forbidden ground outside the boundary of the academy fence. As per his father's dire warnings, he was instantly assaulted. Do not insult the Honorable Guy-sensei in that manner. Naruto stared in horror at the smaller, though still plenty big, like 2 or 3 years older than him big, green thing that was now shouting at him, arms flailing wildly. His mouth dropped open, and the filter in his mind crashed, so words tumbled out before he even processed them himself. Dear Lord, it's multiplying. There was a pause as the words registered, and in the background Naruto saw Niji smirk in a way that indicated that had he been anyone but a jaded Hyuga, he would be rolling on the ground laughing right now. Guy didn't seem to notice what Naruto had said or he was used to random sentences like that, and just accepted them for part of who the son of rival Kakashi was. No, Lee! He cried. This is my good friend, the son of my most worthy adversary, to you known as Kakashi-sensei. His manner of addressing me is affectionate, dating back to a time when he was very small. Lee was now crying. Forgive me, great and noble friend of the terrific Guy-sensei, he wailed. The whole situation was surreal. It seemed to be Naruto's turn to say something, but he stalled. He said. I didn't know you had a son, Froggy. Meaner. Guy-san? There was a pause. Hyuga smirked more, his shoulders actually shaking slightly from the effort of maintaining his aloof persona. Ah, no, my dear child, Guy announced to the world. I wish it were so, but Lee is not my son. He is my most excellent disciple. I am honored that you think me worthy of such a position, Guy-sensei, Lee announced right back. And you, here he turned to Naruto, who took a reflexive step backwards. I am humbled and overwhelmed with joy that you find me similar enough to my glorious teacher that you mistook me for his blessed offspring. You mean this is contagious? There it was again, his mouth just blurted out something without warning him first. The girl that Naruto had only vaguely registered until now began to giggle. Niji put a hand over his mouth and his shoulders began to twitch. Then salvation. Ah, Guy. I see you've found my wayward puppy. Dad. In an instant, Naruto attached himself to Kakashi's waist, clinging desperately. Save me. Kakashi smiled, closing his eye happily, one hand negligently petting Naruto's blonde head. Thanks for rescuing him. I was a little late in collecting him from school today. He was no doubt worried and a little scared. Dad, Naruto whined, feeling his face flush red. Okay, so it was truth. Dad didn't have to say it. And in that blithe tone, too. As if he was some stupid little kid. The hand on his head ruffled his hair again, but otherwise Dad didn't respond. We better be going, then, the adult smiled. I've got a busy afternoon, and Naru still hasn't done his homework. See you later, Guy-sensei. Nice to see you again, midgets. And he tugged his son away. After a block or two walked in silence, assimilating everything that had just happened, Naruto looked up at his father. Are you sure that boy isn't his son? He asked, knowing Kakashi would know he was talking about Guy and Lee. Kakashi stalled for a moment at the nightmare that was Guy actually managing to procreate, and quickly reassured himself that even Guy couldn't do that without help, and what woman on the planet would that with that? She didn't exist. Surely not. Guy was 13 when they was born, he said calmly, instead of going into that with his 9-year-old. Considering his reaction when I came home with you at 17, I'm sure. Besides, if you really look at him, his face and bone structures are not that similar to Guy's. The eyebrows are the same, sure, but everything else is cosmetic. He's mimicking. Naruto shuddered. Naruto! Dinner! Kakashi waited for the standard reply of coming, Dad, but heard only silence. A stab of concern flickered within him. Naruto? Here I am, Dad. At the quiet reply, Kakashi turned and saw Naruto coming in the other door, paler than normal. The markings on his cheeks stood out almost starkly, making Kakashi blink. Oh. Are you okay, Naru? You're looking a little. The blonde shrugged, sinking down to sit at the table and resting his head in his hands. I've got a headache. Feel a little off. I'm not very hungry. I must be tired. Can I just go to bed? Kakashi hesitated. In anyone else, he'd say that Naruto was coming down with something, but this was Naruto. In all his time as the kid's father, Naruto had never gotten sick, not once. Jiraiya had once told him that the Kyuubi was good for some things like that. Naruto would enjoy good health and longevity as a result of having the demon sealed within him. Which meant that either he wasn't sick, or he was very sick. Did you have a busy day at the academy? He asked carefully. Naruto shrugged, drawing shapes on the tabletop with a fingertip. Yeah, I guess. Lots of sparring. I didn't do too well. He glanced through his bangs at his father as he shared this news, almost as if afraid of the reaction. It wasn't often that he said that in relation to his schoolwork. Kakashi made sure his expression remained open and unchanged. Everyone has off days, he said casually. Even me. Don't worry too much about it, pup. Now I want you to try to eat something. You might be tired, but some food might make you feel a little better, okay? Naruto reluctantly agreed, and Kakashi felt his worry mount higher as the blonde pushed food around his plate, barely touching it. Finally, the father released his son to bed, thinking to let him sleep it off. He trailed Naruto up the stairs, pausing outside the kid's bedroom door to let him get changed before pushing into the room. Naruto was already collapsed in bed, and Kakashi made his way over to him. Here's some water, if you need it, he said, putting a cup of it on the bedside table. Good night. He bent over and placed a kiss on Naruto's forehead, and paused for a moment. Naruto was warm. Now, admittedly, Naruto was and had always been naturally a few degrees warmer than what was normal for a human, the demon he carried causing the change, but his paternal instincts screamed at him that Naruto was a fraction warmer even than that. Later, Kakashi would hate himself for dismissing the thought as overcautious. Kumobikure was a miserable place most of the time. It was high in the air, the clouds and sheer rocky mountains it was balanced precariously within and atop, making for cold, slick, treacherous living conditions. Admittedly, sometimes the clouds cleared enough to see more than 2 feet ahead, and the sun hit the stones just right, and the village was breathtaking. It didn't happen often. This day was one of the miserable ones, and Daitaro's mood was dark to match. He was a jounin, and not one of the weak tea breed that had been cropping up ever since the Yondame's very bright idea of offering up promotions as an incentive to breed. No, Daitaro had earned his jockstraps. He was a real jounin. "Get the hell back into line!" he shouted at a chunin who was slightly out of formation. The man swallowed and quickly put himself into the correct place, standing at attention. In some villages, things like rank and hierarchy were less rigid and enforced, but in Kumo there was a very clear divide between ranks, and even within the ranks based on time in service. There was a pecking order in the village, everyone standing on an individual peg, outranking some and subservient to others. At that moment in time, the highest on the totem pole was, of course, the rakeage. The lowest was little Koriha Jin, the youngest of the children in the lowest form at the academy. Everyone else, students, teachers, genin, chunin, jounin, Anbu, retired or otherwise, active or not, was somewhere in between. Daitaro was in the highest quarter, a rather high-ranking jounin, 14th from the rakeage, in fact. Right now, he was briefing a chunin/jounin assembly on some changes that needed to be made to the village's security, and different patrol routes and shift times that would follow on from the changes. Then he was going to chew out some idiots for some idiotic mistakes that only the most idiotic idiots would ever make. He was looking forwards to that part. With a heavy sigh, the jounin scanned the 50-odd men standing in formation. They were waiting on one last platoon of jounin, then they'd be ready to begin. To pass the time and attempt to ease the headache threatening his sanity, Daitaro dug in his pocket for a cigarette that was laced with something just a little more fun than plain old nicotine, and lit it up. The headache eased. Someone shifted the tiniest of amounts, and Daitaro sent the chunin a look that made the teenage girl wince just a little. The jounin surveyed her dispassionately, her belly rounded and pulling her uniform out of alignment. She'd be gone soon, too large and unwieldy to be on active duty. Mind, if her back and or feet hurt too much for her to stand at attention for 20 minutes, then she was probably already at the stage when she needed to be relieved of duty. Bloody hell, Daitaro thought darkly, quickly counting heads. That most of the full-fledged ninja in the village were assembled here before him was a frightening thought. There were so few of them, it was no wonder that the rakeage was desperate for children to be born. Still, the way the man had gone about it caused no end of strife. The workforce was cut in half. To begin with, Kunoichi had dropped out of active service to birth the brats that could be heard screaming from any part of the village at any time of day or night nowadays. With a sigh, he put his cigarette to his lips and took a long drag of it, exhaustion weighing on his mind. It was a real problem, no doubt about it. But it wasn't his problem. His problem was keeping the village running smoothly despite the lack of hands to share the load. His problem was keeping everyone working thrice as hard as normal to keep up with the Kunoichi disappearing off the active duty roster. His problem was to do his job, and he had to trust the rakeage to deal with all other problems, or assign them to someone who could. All right, shut up," he shouted, the last few stragglers finally arriving. The smattering of tiny whispers cut off right away, and everyone stood at attention. "We're here to make some changes to our patrols, and I'm only going over this once, so you better damn well pay attention. The first shift will now be from midnight to 2 p.m. It was getting late. Kakashi was carefully doctoring a set of kunai, examining each one with a discerning eye and judging them with a standard that could only be called supercritical. These weapons belonged to his son. He would not let Naruto into any sort of danger with a weapon that had even the slightest chance of failing. He picked up the last one and examined it carefully before replacing the handle entirely. Then he began dragging a hearty file across the dulled edges of the knife, sharpening them to razors. After all this, he picked up a cloth and polished his fingerprints off the shiny metal. He paused when the polishing showed him a tiny fracture in the blade inside, putting it on the discard pile. Nope. Not good enough for his kid. Observing the tiny pile of kunai that he had deemed to be worthy of Naruto, he sighed again and mused that he'd need to buy some more. He'd dwindled the kid's supply down to a measly 12 kunai. The clock, Kakashi was surprised to see when he glanced at it, read 10:30 p.m. It had somehow gotten very late. The Hotaki quickly packed the kunai away, laying the rejected ones aside in a basket that he'd deliver later to the blacksmith to be melted down and recycled. Then he climbed to his feet and moved to the stairs, intent on checking on Naruto. He cracked the door to his son's room open and froze, his heart skipping a beat or two in a moment of panic. The boy was shivering beneath his winter duvet, which he had clearly dragged out of the nearby closet, curled around Oink for comfort. Kakashi felt real fear jolt through him to look at his son's pale face and trembling limbs. The adult placed his bare hand on the boy's forehead, and his breath caught at how high Naruto's fever had become. And so quickly. Kakashi's first thought was to reach for the first aid kit and find some anti-fever medication. He dismissed that idea out of hand, knowing that this wasn't something cough drops and tea could fix. Naruto was ill, horribly so, and he needed a doctor. The father rushed to pull on clothing appropriate for going out in, not even noticing that he was mixing civilian and shinobi apparel. He rammed his feet into his sandals and hurried back upstairs, moving into Naruto's room and attempting to tease the boy out of his blanket. Naruto whimpered, eyes cracking open. "Dad?" he murmured. "Daddy, I don't feel," the boy trailed off, and Kakashi realized that this was just as new and frightening for Naruto as it was for him. The poor kid had never been sick before. He'd have no idea what was going on. "It's okay, Naruto," the adult breathed, gently easing his son into his arms, blanket, Oink and all, in a bizarre mimicry of what he had done long ago when he was first gifted this precious bundle. Where would he take him? To whom? There was a reason that Kakashi had carefully kept Naruto away from medics and doctors. They were trained to see truths of the flesh, and it would be all too easy for one to discover, by accident, even, who Naruto truly was, what he contained. But now Kakashi had to take the risk. He had to. So who to choose? Someone with a good medical literacy, someone who didn't know Kakashi intimately enough to realize that the child wasn't a close genetic match to him, someone who would just do the job and let them leave, someone who if they did find out would probably keep the secret. Someone easily silenced if it seemed they would not. Rin. The thought came as a surprise. He hadn't given his once teammate a word or thought since he'd last seen her, more than 12 years ago now. The last time they'd met had been at Obito's funeral. Kakashi, a fresh 13-year-old, had been aching physically with his injuries and numb internally from the grief and self-loathing. The Uchiha had tried to deny his right to be at the funeral, but Minato-sensei had thrown his weight around until they'd conceded to allow the teen a spot at the back of the crowd. Rin had been there, standing apart from Kakashi and refusing to meet his gaze. She hadn't spoken a word to him since that horrible mission 3 weeks beforehand when they had lost Obito. After watching an empty casket being lowered into the ground and listening to the priest speak and pray for the soul of the dead, the crowd had dispersed. Rin, face streaked with tears, had been walking away herself and had dropped her umbrella. Kakashi had bent to pick it up for her. That broke the dam. "It's all your fault." That's what she'd shouted. "I hate you! I hate you!" "I know," had been Kakashi's thoughts as he stood silently and let her scream in rage at him. "Me too. Me too." Minato-sensei had tried to hush her, but Rin had been inconsolable. "It's your fault." She kept screaming, "Your fault, he's dead. You bastard! Why didn't you come for me? I knew you wouldn't. I knew, right from the moment they took me. You wouldn't and he did, and so it's your fault he died. You were supposed to come for me, not him." Then she'd said the sentence that had sealed their estrangement. "But I guess he was an idiot. He was your friend after all." Kakashi had come very close to losing his mind that moment. Now, years later, he wasn't quite sure of the order of things, but he knew he'd screamed, he knew he'd launched himself at his teammate. He knew he'd scratched her and pulled her hair and slammed her head against the ground and shouted that he would never let her talk about Obito like that, and sobbed that he wouldn't let his own faults taint Obito's memory, and that if she wouldn't shut up then he would shut her up. He knew that Minato-sensei had grabbed him, pulled him off of her, and tossed him to the ground before hurrying Rin away. Kakashi had remained there for a very long time, peripherally aware of the sound of the gravediggers shoveling cold, wet dirt onto the casket with the most bone-chilling sounds that existed. Later, Minato-sensei had tried several times to reconcile the two, but was met with stony resistance from both parties. Rin hated Kakashi for abandoning her. Kakashi hated her for the fact that she was more hurt by that than by Obito's death. Then Minato-sensei had died and Rin had secured a placement out of Konoha in one of the outposts on the border, and Kakashi had forgotten that she existed. Still, news like your Genin squad teammate returning home for the first time in 5 years in between rotations tended to reach relevant ears. Kakashi was aware that the woman was in town, burying herself in the hospital while she waited to be reassigned to another outpost, having served her 5-year stint at the Hirakanwa outpost and been sent back to Konoha. Word had it she'd applied to be sent to the Kishiguro outpost on the opposite side of the country, but such transfers always took at least 3 months to arrange. Whatever the reason, Rin's presence did provide a bizarre solution. As a medic, she was contractually bound to treat any Konohan citizen who required her aid to the best of her capabilities. And she knew from experience that Kakashi was a cold-hearted bastard who would take her slamming the door in his face straight to the Hokage and get her dishonorably discharged with a penalty punishment besides without hesitation or qualm. And she hadn't had any contact with Kakashi in 12 years, making her enough of a stranger to fool when it came to Naruto. She also knew and loved Minato-sensei, so if she found out the truth, chances were she'd keep quiet. She'd probably storm straight to the Hokage to complain and demand custody herself, but Kakashi was confident that he could crush her if it came down to a custody battle, be it in court or in the Hokage's office. Even if he didn't though, she was a stranger to most of Konoha by now and her word would not be trusted over Kakashi's, and she was expected to be gone for another 5 years very shortly. She would be easy to make disappear forever. More than all of this, she was a damn good medic. Kakashi nodded to himself, mind made up. He would seek out his once teammate for assistance. Okay, Naru, hold on. I'm going to take you somewhere you can get some help, he murmured to his precious cargo, and set off at a run, careful not to jostle the child. He reached the hospital a few long minutes later and pushed inside the emergency department. I need to see Tamanaka-rin, he said to the nurse behind the reception whose job it was to direct traffic. My son is very ill. The nurse took one look at Naruto's pale face and nodded. Take a seat, I'll locate Dr. Tamanaka, she replied. Kakashi obeyed, sitting stiffly in the uncomfortable plastic chair available, and rubbing his hand along Naruto's back in an effort to give comfort. The boy had fallen into a fevered doze, mostly asleep leaning against his father's chest. It felt like an age, but in reality it was probably barely 20 minutes before the door leading from the emergency room to the rest of the hospital opened and a familiar figure walked through. Kakashi looked her up and down. She was still recognizable, barely, with hardly anything of the noble, awkwardly proportioned 13-year-old she used to be left in her. She'd filled out well, grown much taller and received her adult proportions and physical grace. But she was still the same, still Rin, with a short brown bob cut and purple tattoos on each cheek. Kakashi stood up as the nurse who had called her here gestured in his direction. Rin followed the hand, spotted him, and froze. Well, I guess that means that I haven't changed much, either, he thought wryly. He took a deep breath, looked down at Naruto to strengthen his resolve, and stepped forwards. Rin. He spoke his first word to her in more than a decade. Her face had drained of color, and she pressed her lips together in a thin line. You. The word was breathed out barely audible, and Kakashi knew in an instant that the bad blood between them had festered to the point of world-ending hatred. Still, she was his best bet, so he opened his mouth to tell her what he needed, but she shook her head. Not here, she muttered, looking around the semi-crowded emergency room, and stepped backwards. Come on, not here, with all these people. Come through to one of these rooms. Without a word, Kakashi followed her to an examination room, vaguely wondering if she wanted to remove witnesses from fear of embarrassment due to the earth-shattering fight they were due for, or because she was going to attempt to kill him. He shifted his child awkwardly so he had enough of an arm free to reach his weapons, if need be. Rin shut the door of the examination room behind her and turned to the man she had once shared a team with. Silence stretched, long and frigidly cold. Finally, Rin broke it. "What do you want?" she demanded. Kakashi hesitated for the briefest of instants. "I need your help," he said simply. Rin swelled indignantly, and he hurried to explain before she started her self-righteous "how dare you and who do you think you are" rants. "My son is sick, and he needs help. You're the only person I could think of to help." Rin blinked. "You have a kid?" she demanded, peering for the first time at the child Kakashi was holding. Her eyes widened a fraction as she realized just how old the boy had to be, how young Kakashi would have had to have been when he was born, and then narrowed in disgust. "Where is she, the mother?" the medic demanded. Kakashi didn't blink or flinch. "Dead." "Who?" Now Rin was pulling up a mental list of all potential comrades who had died and wondering which of them had gone to bed with the man before her. "Funkita," Kakashi said shortly. "You didn't know her." "Did you?" Rin asked shrewdly. Kakashi sighed. "Does that really matter at this point?" he asked, looking down at Naruto in his arms and wondering if he was better taking his chances with a medic that didn't hate him. Love affair or one-night stand or interrogation gone awry, is that really important right now? Rin just stared at him, and Kakashi growled. "Fine," he spat. "I was on a deep cover mission in Kumo, okay? I made a mistake, got involved with a girl. Happy? Please, Rin, he's sick." The medic scoffed, snatching the form he'd filled out in the waiting room out of his hand and turning away, shoulders tense and face angry, but Kakashi relaxed a hair. She hadn't tossed him out, she was going to help. Rin attached the form to a clipboard and began reading through it. Hataki. Naruto. Rin's face twisted in a grimace of distaste and grief for her teacher at the name, and she shot Kakashi a sharp look. If that was meant to be a joke. It wasn't, Kakashi snapped. Sensei wanted his son to be named Naruto in the hopes the kid would be just like his namesake. Seemed like sound reasoning to me. Rin scowled, but accepted that the socially stunted Hataki probably would name his son in such an unusual way and turned back to her chart. 9 years old, allergic to bees, she flicked the top paper up, reading the page beneath. Hasn't had his vaccinations. Guess some things never change. Kakashi let that barb slide for the sake of the boy shivering in his arms. Rin put the chart aside and pulled a penlight out of her doctor coat pocket, flicking it on and shining it into Naruto's blue eyes to test his pupils. Naruto whimpered and hid his face in his father's chest, hiding from the light and the woman who snapped at his dad. Rin was taken aback at the very real pain on Kakashi's hidden face as he rubbed the smaller Hataki's back and murmured softly to him in a way he never would have done as a child. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her voice a fraction gentler than before. Kakashi shook his head. "He was fine this morning. I picked him up from school today, and he was fine then too. But when I called him down to dinner, he was the Jounin," broke off, closing his eye and taking a moment to hate himself for not bringing Naruto to the hospital right then. "But he seemed all right, just a little fevered. Nara doesn't tend to get sick, at all." "At all?" Rin repeated dubiously. Kakashi nodded curtly. "It's an inheritance of sorts," he replied flatly. The medic still looked skeptical. "You got sick as a kid." "He didn't inherit it from me." That came out more snappishly than he'd intended. To the Hataki's surprise, however, Rin backed off, no doubt assuming that Naruto had some sort of healing Kekkei Genkai gained through maternal inheritance. Kakashi took a deep breath and continued. "So it was unusual, but I thought that he was fine. But then he just got worse and worse until by bedtime, he was like this." He gestured the boy huddled in his lap, paler than death and slick with cold sweat, shaking violently despite the heavy blanket coiled around him. Rin frowned, chewing her lip contemplatively. "Let's see what his temperature is," she said, and it was with careful fingers that she turned Naruto's head and slipped a thermometer into his mouth. Instantly, she knew he was far too warm, his heat striking to her fingers. Naruto's face twisted and he spat the thermometer out. "Dad," he whined, eyes squinted shut against the light in the examination room. "Can't we just go home? Please? My head hurts and I feel sick." "Naruto. You feel sick. That's why we're here," Kakashi said softly. I'm sorry, I know it's uncomfortable being examined, but you have to let Rin-san do it so that she can figure out how to make you better. The blonde whined and squirmed, but let Rin take his temperature. Her brown eyes widened in alarm as she read the result, 42.8. He's really, really warm. He has a dangerously high fever, she said to the father, instantly switching from slighted friend into much-needed medic and moving to the white starch bed nearby. Here, lay him down, I'm going to need to examine him properly, and I can't do that while you're hiding him. Naruto whimpered and clung, but Kakashi resolutely forced the boy to let go of his shirt and lie on the bed as the medic bent over him, prodding and poking experimentally. Kakashi found himself shunted backwards as Rin became more and more alarmed. Naruto started to cry, and he was pushed out of the room entirely and ordered sternly to go back to the waiting room and wait. That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.